Today we are going to be taking a look at the BTLO lab called SAM. Now SAM is a medium difficulty box focused on security operations, and Linux is the operating system that we will be performing the investigation in. Now with a name like SAM, it is safe to assume that this is going to be a Windows victim that we are investigating, and I'm going to go ahead and start the investigation. So while that loads up, we can take a closer look at what we are working with here. So the description reads, Sam is a neatnik when it comes to cleanliness and hygiene. Find out if he also follows cyber hygiene. Spoiler, he does not. An incident has been reported stating Sam has lost his SAM. Case in point. It's your job to figure out what has happened. You are provided with Sysmon logs, network traffic, and a memory dump. Now to investigate these logs, we are told to use Linux CLI, Wireshark, and Volatility 2. Now Volatility 2 is going to be for parsing memory files. We'll get into that. Wireshark will be for network traffic, and then Linux CLI is likely for Sysmon logs, depending on if they're in text or JSON format, something along those lines. Now this is a fairly old box, and I have already completed it, as you can see here. Now I really enjoyed this box, and I thought it was an excellent example of triaging log files and a good example of how an investigation could go on a Windows host. Now we're also given this MITRE attack technique here, 1078.003. So we can do a quick Google search for this and go to the MITRE attack page, and 1078 is actually going to be for valid accounts, and then .003 off of that will be for local accounts. Now this is going to be an initial access vector that attackers will use, and essentially they're going to be gathering credentials and then simply logging in with those valid accounts, in this case local accounts. Now this differs from actually breaking into a system and brute forcing your way into it, because a lot more of the hard work is focused on gathering credentials and logging in that way. Now this is particularly relevant today because IBM, not IMDb, IBM released their X-Force report, and in that report it actually shows a major uptick in the use of valid accounts as an initial access vector from years previously. And this is super interesting because it kind of shows where threat actors are shifting in where they're putting their time and their resources. Highly recommend you check out that report if you haven't already. A lot of interesting stuff in there. But that's not what this video is about. So now that our lab is all fired up, let's get cracking. So the first thing I'm going to do is load the investigations folder, and then I'll also fire up a terminal while we're at it. Make this a little bit bigger, easier to see. And in our investigations here, we have a README file. That's always going to be the best place to start, wouldn't you agree? I can make this bigger as well. Now here it says there are 3 files available for your analysis, sysmon.json, so we will be using Linux CLI, and it suggests using grep, unique, and sort to assist with parsing out these logs. And then we are supplied with a pcap file, and then we will be using Wireshark, and then winadmin.raw will be our memory dump, and then we will be using volatility, and how nice of them, they've actually supplied us with the profile to use, so that'll save us some steps. Otherwise we would be running volatility with the image info plugin, trying to figure out that on our own, so saves us a little bit of time there. Now it does look like sysmon.json is already opened up here in Sublime Text for us, but if it's not, that can be accessed from the investigations folder as well. Now there is quite a few logs in here, but Sysmon is great because it's going to give us a lot of information. You can see there's process IDs in here along with parent process IDs, and just a ton of really useful information for telling a story and painting a picture of what actually happened on this machine. So now that we have these logs opened, we need to kind of narrow down what we're looking for, right? So we're going to take a look at the memory dump, and we're going to be diving into volatility to assist with this. Now right off the bat, you can run volatility and then with the -H switch and get some help, kind of get a good starting point of where to how to run this tool. Now specifically, I'm going to be focusing in the beginning here on things like processes. So this will be pslist, psscan, pstree, and psxview. All of these are going to give us different levels of information regarding the processes. So we can just see where we're at and head over to the desktop. And then into investigations. Great, so now I'm going to fire off the first volatility command here. We need to specify the initial file with -f, and then that'll be winadmin. Now with volatility and Windows memory dumps, we do need to specify that profile that we saw earlier. So we can do this by typing -- profile and then equals, and then I believe we copied it earlier, but just in case, let's go back, copy it once again, and then hit them with the Control-Shift-V to paste into a terminal. And great. So this is the initial setup for volatility. This is what's going to be needed pretty much every time we actually go to run volatility. And then we can go back in and inject our plugins right after that. So let's start with pslist. And I'm actually going to output this to a pslist.txt file. It's going to be a little bit messy. I wouldn't recommend outputting your text files directly into your investigation folder. But for this walkthrough, why not? Let's go for it. So that was done very quick, but while this runs, we can take a look at our first questions before we dive in. So the first question is, what is the attacker IP and what is the port that they got a reverse shell on? The second question is, what's the name of the malicious file that gave remote access to the attacker? And then the third question, expanding on that, is what's the process that has been called by the payload upon execution? So we can start diving into this now. So let's go ahead and do subl to open up Sublime Text on that new pslist file we just created. And then now we have our list of processes. Okay, but the main point here is that you can see PID and PPID, process ID, and the parent process ID. So you can see this is a Windows host. There's going to be a lot of Windows-based services here that are running processes that are normal in an environment. So we're going to be looking for things that stand out. Anything with a timestamp here is going to stand out as a little bit unique at the very least. You can see Sysmon running, and if we scroll down a little bit more, just looking for anything that stands out. So we have dump cap here. This is likely going to be for the memory dump that was executed post-compromise. So we could make a note of that though, just to be on the safe side and investigate that later on. And now we're getting into some PowerShell here. This is definitely going to be a point of interest, so we want to take a note here of that. Going a bit further in these processes, we have some SSH here. This will be encrypted traffic, so it's not going to help us too much, but it does suggest something that SSH was at least used and running during the time of the capture. Looking a little bit more, we have bash, shell, command line. The bash and shell is going to be interesting for sure. So all of this is going to be going into my notes, and we might as well go to the end of the list here, see if anything else stands out. We have another dump it. Could be interesting, likely just the dump from the memory though, as mentioned previously. So I'm going to focus on PowerShell first because of a few reasons. The first one being that there's two different processes running, and you can see they do have unique process IDs here. So this second PowerShell here is going to be the child process to this initial one. So something was executed and began running from this initial PowerShell here. So knowing that PowerShell was ran, we have a few different things we can do. My first thought is going to be going back into our Sysmon logs here and actually looking for PowerShells specifically because, as mentioned previously, and if you know Sysmon, there's going to be some good information in here. We could even get the command line. So that's going to be where I'm going to initially want to look. Now we could go and do what the README suggested and use grep for sure. Use things like unique and sort. That's one option. Thankfully, Sublime Text is installed. I happen to love Sublime Text, and like any text editor, you can hit Control F and search pretty easily. And so if there were a lot of PowerShell logs, this would not work. But thankfully, there doesn't seem to be a lot because we do have some juicy stuff right off the bat with the very first record that was found. While editing this video in post, I realized I only showed one way to find these logs, and it wasn't the best way. It would have been more thorough to search with Sublime or use grep to look for the specific process ID and or parent process ID for the PowerShell process we found with volatility. This would narrow down our results to the exact process we were looking at. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, now back to the walkthrough. And so real quick, another way to do this would be to go to ls again, and then we could do cat sysmon and then pipe grep. And then a switch I like to do when searching for keywords like this is something like we could search for PowerShell.exe, and then I like to do the -c flag with 20. You could do something like 10 as well, but what this is going to do is return 20 lines of context around the found term or string that's being searched for with grep. So it'll show the PowerShell line of text that's found, and then 20 lines surrounding it. 10 tends to get the job done, and 10 works really well with things like strings. But for these logs, I'm just going to want to pull in a good amount of information just in case some of the surrounding log files have more information in them. So I will also output this real quick to PowerShell grep.txt. Not the best naming right now, but it's late, so you'll forgive me. So now we can do subl PowerShell grep.txt. And here we go. So we have a similar thing here to what we do with just finding the logs. If there were many PowerShell logs spread throughout this entire Sysmon, then it may be a little bit difficult to narrow down, but there doesn't seem to be too many. So going back to our original JSON here, we can start to look at this a little bit more. So we found our initial PowerShell process here, process ID of 3888. And the parent process of 4568. Now it looks like we actually do have a parent command line from the spawned process, and we can see where that is. So that's going to be from this mshta.exe file, and that's actually coming from a download. So this is very likely to be the malicious file that we're looking for, and just so happens to be the answer to question 2. So now if we scroll down, once again noting the process IDs here, we should be able to follow the next few records and kind of get a better picture of what's going on. So we have the parent process here, and we have PowerShell now. So PowerShell is getting executed. There's another command being ran. Let's see what we got. Let's see. So we have a new object. The properties here, compression.gzip.stream. So it looks like we are compressing some file, and it's going to be in base 64. So being that this is a base 64 string, I did spend some time trying to decode this with CyberChef and the command line. But one thing to note here is that since it is being compressed with gzip here, it's likely going to be an entire file. So unzipping it isn't necessarily going to, or excuse me, decoding it isn't necessarily going to give us a lot of information. So at this point, we know the spawn process is PowerShell, and we can just keep following these records actually just by scrolling down a bit and following what happens. So we have a little bit more action here, and the first thing that stands out immediately is port 80. This is going to be the destination port, so there's going to be some unencrypted traffic happening here. So we can see that it is still PowerShell running here. Once again, HTTP on that port 80, and this is likely going to be our attacker here, and the vector they're using to gain access. This is going to be the answer to the first question here, the IP and the port. We will go look at Wireshark in a moment to confirm this, but I still want to look at these Sysmon logs while we're in here. So if we keep scrolling a bit, we can see 443 now for HTTPS. Oh, so this is interesting here. So this looks to be JAWS enum PS1. Let's definitely take note of that because this is going to be an enumeration tool. This is a little bit further in the logs here, it looks like. So at this first record 768 here, it does look like we have another encoded script being ran here. This one looks to be a lot longer, and this is coming directly from that PowerShell process that we saw earlier. So let's go ahead and copy this, and then maybe it's worth our time to decode this a bit. So I'll copy this wall of text here, and I will bring it into CyberChef, and we'll take a look and see what CyberChef can do for us. So I should have it open here. So we can copy all of our text in here, and this looks to be base 64. Let's send it and see what happens. And we are getting some decoding here. It's a little bit messy. It doesn't look that clear, but we can see some clear text coming through. It looks like we are getting PowerShell, new object, getting our properties, process, start info, all that good stuff. And if we scroll down a bit, We still have some encoded text, but the rest did come through. And it is messy. Instead of spending time cleaning this up or just trying to read through it, I'll take it back to the terminal. Then we will decode it in a little bit more of a clean way. So what we can do now, I'm just going to go new file, paste all this good stuff in here, and then save it from the GUI. Sometimes quicker is easier. And then we'll do decode. Oops, I don't want to do that. Let's go here. Decode me.txt. And that's just saved to the desktop. So what we can do now is go back to our desktop, make sure it's there, and then we could type in base64 and then -d for decode, and then decode me.txt, and then I will output this to I'm decoded.txt. Horrible names, but bear with me. So now that we have that, we can open up Sublime Text with this once again and check out what we got. So this is a lot cleaner of an output. I found the terminal decoding to work a little bit better than CyberChef in this case. But now that we have this decoded here, it doesn't tell us a lot about the compression that's used. You can see it's still going to be an encoded string, but it is going to list more properties out for us. So this will be for question number 5. It says, what property in the executed script says that the process runs without using the operation system shell? Should be operating system. So I did some Googling for this. I actually wasn't entirely sure what the answer would be. I knew it had to be in one of these properties. Since we did take the time to decode this, it had to be in here. So the one that stands out is use shell execute equals false. So we can actually copy this and learn a little bit more about it just by doing a quick Google search. And then this first link here on the Microsoft page looks good. So process start info use shell execute. And then it says here gets or sets a value indicating whether to use the operating system shell to start the process. So this right here is going to be our answer, use shell execute, for question number 5. And now that we have this decoded, I'm going to go ahead and close it as well as that one. And then that brings us to question number 4, so taking a step back. So knowing the payload name and the process name, if the payload was generated by MSF Venom, what would be the format option that the attacker would have used? Now for this one, I wasn't able to necessarily find it in the lab, mostly because I found the answer pretty quickly just by looking up, I think it was HTA and then PowerShell MSF Venom. And then once we get here, there's a few links that come up, one of them being this MSF cheat sheet here. Then there is a GitHub for an issue, it looks like. So right off the bat, this is an issue ticket here on GitHub, but this is going to be our payload likely because it says hta.psh, and this is a payload. Coming into this hacking article here by Raj Chandel. We could look into it a bit further. So HTA is going to stand for HTML application payload, and it gives us a payload example. So it's going to be using Windows and then a reverse TCP shell, and then it looks like the -f for format is HTA-PSH. So that's going to be our MSF Venom payload type. And then we've actually already answered question 7 as well. So the gzip.stream is going to be the answer for the compression stream that is used in the payload. We saw that in clear text without having to do any decoding over in our Sysmon logs. Now for question number 7, from the SAM and the system file that has been exfiltrated, how many users' hashes would have been identified? So we can go back to our investigations directory here, and we're going to be using volatility once again. So we can enter our command for winadmin, and then entering in our profile. Go pull it again from our README. Now, a quick way to actually find hashes on a memory dump like this is with a built-in plugin called hashdump. This is going to be very straightforward. I will even output it to a file, hashes.txt. And this should run fairly quickly, but this is going to dump the NTLM hashes that are found on a Windows system. And if the number is accurate, this should tell us how many user hashes the attacker was able to access and view. So let's actually just run cat hashes.txt. And we can see here we have our NTLM hashes in a nice clean spread for us, ready to be cracked. And that tells us that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 users potentially that the attacker could have gained access to. Now, questions 8 and 9 actually want us to crack these passwords. So things like Hashcat and all that are not installed on these labs, because these are of course VMs, so they're not going to be able to crack things very effectively. So in order to actually crack these, they're likely not going to be that complicated. So we can just copy them and then go to Google and type in online NTLM crack and see what we get. So we get crack station, and then there's one I actually like that's not listed here. I think it's just hashes.com. Is that it? Yeah, hashes.com is one I like as well. So same tool, doing the same thing here. We just have to enter in the second half of the NTLM hash here, and this will be the NT portion of the NTLM subset that we're looking at. So we can submit and search. And would you look at that, we actually found the password, and I forget who I did this for. What is this? FC525. Yeah, so this is going to be our admin password. So that'll be a password with a capital P, 0, exclamation point. And there you go, you cracked it because it was very easy and found on an online database. So we can do a similar thing with the SAM NTLM here. Let's go ahead and grab the NT portion, and we can paste that in here. Submit and search, and look at that, hashes worked out for us. So standard user is Sam's password. So going back to the original prompt here, Sam is definitely not following cyber hygiene because that password is pretty bad. Now we haven't even really touched the packet capture yet to find all of these answers. Now when I ran through this box initially, I was cross-checking pretty much every finding with Wireshark. That is absolutely what you should be doing. The fact that you didn't need them up until the end here really shows how much can be gained from proper logging and even parsing through a memory file. You're going to get a lot of really good forensics information about what happened on a system. So finally, diving into Wireshark, we have 2 questions left to answer. What is the port the attacker used to log into the system after cracking the passwords? And then are there any other scripts that the attacker executed on the system? Find the name of the script. So if you remember earlier, we actually did find an additional script in our Sysmon logs. I believe we even come in here and just search. Yeah, there it is. So PowerShell.exe, but it happens to take me right to what we found earlier. So this is jaws-enum.ps1. This does look to be an enumeration, and then we could actually search this on Google and find out more information about it. And it will confirm that this is an enumeration tool that looks for privilege escalation on a system. So we still need to know what port the attacker used to log into the system after cracking passwords. So one way we can do this is type in ip.source and then look for that attacker IP. So it was 172.16.0.5, and we can filter out our results here a little bit. And knowing everything we know now, we definitely have a timeline of what happened. So confirming what we found earlier, there is a lot of traffic going from the attacker IP to our target IP, and they are coming from port 80 here. And so there's a lot of traffic going through. We can kind of manually sift through this, look for anything unique that stands out. Scrolling down far enough, we actually get some SMB traffic come into play. And so what I'm looking for here is things like this. So unencrypted traffic, we can kind of dive into the HTTP headers that were sent and see what they're looking for. Once again, this is jaws enum.ps1. So if we didn't find this earlier in the Sysmon logs, this is another location where this shows up. But scrolling through, right now I'm just looking for any kind of unique ports, and here we go. So port 22, that is going to be for SSH, and it does pick up here shortly after enumerating. We could see the last page they visit was this enumeration, and then all the traffic from our target attacker is on SSH. Not a good sign later in the logs like this, because that is showing that the privilege escalation was successful and they were taking advantage of that MITRE attack technique. I believe it was 1078. Excuse me, 1078. That's valid accounts, local accounts. So that is how I solved this box, and I really am enjoying what BTLO is offering. I signed up for Pro recently, so I've been going through and doing all the retired boxes, trying to catch up, and then also trying to do the live boxes and increase my rank on the leaderboard. It is a lot of fun. I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't heard of it, or if you have heard of it and you're on the fence. It's definitely worth it. It's very refreshing compared to things like Hack the Box, which are great in their own right. I'm just a big fan of the security blue team format because of the blue team level 1. It's all very familiar, and it's intuitive, and it just makes sense. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and look out for future walkthroughs and cybersecurity content.